Hi, everybody. Welcome to Radio Sofia Doctoral Lab. I am Kranti Nanduri, and I'm currently doing my PhD in Economics group at Calcutta, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's discussion. A little bit about Radio Sofia. It's an online platform to discuss socio-economic and political issues and bring academicians and non-academicians together. But today, we have one of the key segments on Radio Sofia, which is called Doctoral Lab, that is exclusively dedicated to research scholars. And this doctoral lab aims to facilitate interaction among the current PhD students, faculty, and researchers outside academic institutions in the fields of management and social sciences. Well, the major reason why doctoral lab is started is because we have very busy and solo lives in the academic world, and we hardly get opportunities to engage with each other's ideas and interests. We probably get to hear a little about our colleagues' PhD work or their research projects in structured academic presentations in very official setup occasionally. But I'd like to believe that most of us have much more to talk and share about our research beyond a paper presentation with focused results. We can discuss about interesting theories, models, or topics that we come across in the journey of a PhD and thereafter. Right. So I think, and I guess most of you also will agree that such discussions will help us to pursue the process of PhD as a scholarly journey rather than, just a mere market-oriented or publication-driven process. So in this spirit, I am really excited to kickstart a series of discussions called Doctoral Lab on Radio Sofia with Ashutosh Jha. And Ashutosh is currently working in Jain Institute of Management and Research as assistant professor in information management area. He completed his PhD from the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, in Management Information Systems Group at the beginning of this year. And so, hi Ashutosh, thank you very much for accepting the invitation and joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kranti. Actually, I was quite happy and slightly anxious that I'm going to be the first person who is beginning this particular series of talk show. So, but I
That's my
definitely I do believe sincerely that more dialogue and deliberations and discussions should happen between the FP students, because as you rightly said, it's sort of a lonely journey, and
right.
Because we are so much involved in our own work, we really get we do not get so many avenues to sort of talk to each other about what everybody else is doing. So in that sense, it's a wonderful initiative, and I'm sure as you progress, you'll get a lot many more speakers, and you can kick on these discussions to an even greater intensity. So thanks to you, and congratulations for having begun this particular journey.
Thank you very much. And guys, so the PhD thesis of Ashutosh is titled as Studies on Techno-Managerial Aspects in Deployment of Next Generation Mobile Broadband Services. And his broader research interests, which are also a part of today's discussion, that is adoption and diffusion of mobile innovations, techno-economics of next generation networks, radio spectrum management, e-governance, and ICTs for human development. Although we'll not be talking about everything, but we will definitely try to touch upon what are Ashutosh's major interests and key aspects of his thesis, and also about his other works and publications, etc. And Ashu, so you have completed your BE in Electrical and Electronics Engineering from BITS Pilani, Goa. And then you worked in IT sector for almost about 6 years. So
Right.
why did you want to join PhD in MIS group, Management Information Systems group?
Right. I mean, honestly, there is no one answer to this question. I think it must have been a series of events which sort of pushed me towards thinking of a PhD in the first place. So basically, how it started all for me was I am an engineering graduate, and like many of our peers, I started my career in an IT firm, and I worked for around 6 years and between three different companies. And somewhere I was I always got this sense that somehow I'm not fitting in. That is the first thing. Second thing, I felt limited in terms of expressing uh, you know uh, expressing myself as an individual. uh, so then there were things like, trying to be I was mostly uncomfortable with the pace of life which an IT career kind of puts you into, whether you want it or not. So there is very less time for introspection, leisure, so on and so forth. So all of this sort of made me slightly, disillusioned, and I started thinking of what else can I do. And I think uh, most of it was my inspiration to search for a PhD program came from, it began with discussions in my peer group, right? A lot of people who were doing PhDs outside the country.
Right.
So I got to talk to them, and then somehow I believed that, okay, probably that kind of an academic atmosphere is something which, I would like to. I mean, I would be more comfortable, and probably I might also enjoy it. So that was just based on a gut feeling and a hunch at that time. And then something very
Okay.
interesting happened. Actually, I think this was in 2013. So sometime around the
Okay.
third quarter, myself and four of my other friends from Bitsvilani, we went to visit Bhutan. Okay, and one of them
Okay.
was already pursuing an FPM in IIM Ahmedabad, in marketing area.
Okay.
So during that
Okay.
that 7 days we spent in Bhutan, because we were meeting after such a long time, we started talking, and then he started
Mm-hmm.
telling us about the FP program at IIM Ahmedabad in particular, and his experiences in general. And that made me quite enthusiastic about, exploring the FP programs in IIMs. Okay, and not just me,
Okay.
apart from me, another friend of mine who's also from Bits and a batchmate, he also got interested. So then after we came
Oh,
back from the vacation, both of us started applying to the FP programs, and incidentally both of us
okay.
wanted to apply in public policy. So it's a coincidence that I am in
Oh,
MIS. I actually wanted to be in public policy,
okay.
because during
Okay.
during my stint in of these 6 years as an IT professional, I was also sort of interested in
Right.
several social issues, and I was involved with some of the NGOs, and just I was
Okay.
just getting to know what is what basically at that time. So I thought, okay, a PhD in public policy will be probably something to aspire. And then both of us applied to, I think I applied to IIM Ahmedabad, and I'm Ahmedabad, Bangalore, and Calcutta. And Arpit, my other friend, he applied to IIM Ahmedabad. He was also a PGP from IIM Ahmedabad, and he was also having the
Okay.
similar disgruntlement from life, so to speak. So so
Right.
yeah, both of us applied, and he got through IIM Ahmedabad in public policy, and I got through IIM Calcutta in MIS. I was not invited for
Okay.
a PPM this thing, but IIM Bangalore
Okay.
invited me for a PPM, and but I couldn't convert it. I went till the final interviews. So this is basically
Okay.
how I landed up at IIM
Yeah.
Calcutta. So
Oh,
initially I was
wonderful.
in two minds whether to pursue something in MIS or not, because initially I was thinking for the
Okay.
public policy. But then I came to the campus, and something about the campus just struck me, and I
Right.
thought, uh, doesn't matter whichever stream I get into, I want to be at IIM Calcutta. Okay. So
Okay.
a lot of it was, I wouldn't say rational. A lot of it was instinct
Right.
based, looking back, definitely. But I definitely do not
Okay.
regret that decision, and it's been a wonderful journey at IIM Calcutta. So this is how I moved from
Ram.
an IT professional to a PhD student.
Okay. So once you joined MIS group, then so what did you understand it's about? Did it align with your interest? So what is this MIS group, like Management Information System? Because now you are also professor in information management area, right? So
Yeah. Okay, you have hit on a very fundamental question. Actually, MIS, it seems that it
right.
means different things to different people. When I talk to
Right.
people, some of them, they understand it as just information technology, or something to do with
Yes.
IT and business, so on and so forth. uh, the
Right.
problem actually is, you know is quite deep rooted, because MIS as a field is still struggling to define its boundaries. But if I have to explain to you in broad terms, basically,
Mhm.
anything having to do with the management of an information system falls under the purview of
Mm.
an MIS. And information system, if I have to speak, uh, basically it deals with uh, collecting information, storing information, processing information, make extracting knowledge out of information. And it can be
Right.
done by individuals, by organizations, so everything at the intersection of people, organization, and technology, right? That
Okay.
pretty much falls under the purview of MIS. I mean,
Okay.
there are
Okay.
different views of this particular discipline. There is a socio-technical view. There's a
Mm-hmm.
computer information systems view of what MIS is. But broadly, whatever falls under the intersection of these three circles: people, technology, and organizations. That basically, is what
Right.
an MIS researcher would be interested to look at.
Okay. So then what? So then from this intersection, like what interests of yours have led to your PhD thesis topic, especially about the mobile broadband services, or So how did you figure out that this is what you would want to do, or what has led to this interest? Yeah.
Uh, so again, I think I did not come with a preconceived idea, which I thought I will pursue.
Right.
Once I was in my first year, I was definitely looking at different domains, different strands of work which people are doing. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
at the end of my first year, basically, I took up a project which was to do with evaluating the feasibility of provisioning 4G services in India. And
Okay.
as I went further, I could see that I could leverage on my own skill set and knowledge about networks and communication systems. And because I came
Mm-hmm.
from that technical background, and I had probably a more nuanced understanding of what communication systems and telecom networks actually are, I was able to sort of go to slightly more depths than just if I mean when compared to if I would have just been looking at a business problem, so to say. So I realized that in the technical domain, a lot of what seems as a business problem actually is a technical problem, right? Of course, there are different
Okay.
there are abstraction layers, like people from the business researchers, they do not want to reach to that level because probably they are constrained by their knowledge and skill set. And more so,
Mm-hmm.
it may not be directly useful to communicate amongst their peer group. So we abstract
Right.
the research problem at a certain level, and then we analyze that. In my case, I found that because I could go I had that luxury to go into the depths of the technicality, I could understand that a lot of business problems are actually originating from the technical issues. And we have to sort of work in tandem with both to sort of resolve the business
Mm-hmm.
issues. So 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 that's how
Okay.
I got interested in the domain. uh,
Okay.
yeah, from there on, I think a lot of it has to also, I also have to give credit to the guide, because he himself comes from a technical
Mm-hmm.
background. So discussions that I had with him over a period of time, that also sort of somehow sort of inculcated and ignited that interest in this particular
Okay.
domain. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So now that we are there, so let me start asking you with like some concepts, like explain us about what is network infrastructure development or radio spectrum acquisition, etc. Just to start to understand your thesis better.
Okay. All right.
Like in simple layman, I mean not very technical, but just to
Sure,
understand
sure. Yeah, I'll
what
try
is it
to
about. Yeah.
I'll try to sort of summarize it for you and the audience. Essentially,
Sure.
at the broad level, what I'm looking at is if you take the telecom market, the market for mobile
Mm,
services and broadband services in India. I'm broadly looking at
mm,
whether it my thesis broadly looks at whether, if an operator wants to sort of deploy a new service, let's say 4G, or after some years maybe 5G, if they want to go
mm.
about provisioning that service uh, in the entire
Right.
country, whether
Hmm.
it is technically and financially feasible for them to do so and to sustain providing those services, right?
Okay.
So this
Hmm.
is what broadly I look at, the problem that I look at. And
Okay.
now that this particular problem makes me explore several nuances. The first of that is basically trying to understand how a particular mobile service, when launched in the market, how people adopt it over a given period of time. So basically trying to gain a temporal understanding of how a mobile service once launched in the market will do over say a 10-year period, right?
Okay.
And so
Right.
again, this brings me to understanding, this brings me to a theory called as diffusion of innovations, which basically looks at
Okay.
how any innovation, a product or a process, or a simple innovation basically will perform when it is launched in the market, right? And there are
Okay.
this theory has a lot of mathematical models which can help you gain,
Mhm.
which can help you understand how a product will perform in the market based on some of the initial data that you have of the product in the market. So some historical information about the data is warranted. So that is one aspect of my
Okay.
thesis. Now once I have an
Okay.
understanding of, say over a given horizon, how mobile services will be adopted by the population, I basically look at,
Hmm.
I basically jump to the supply side, and then try to understand, for an operator, what are the things he needs to meet up the demand, which I've already analyzed, right? So so to say, what are the
Okay.
resources
Right.
that an operator needs, right? So there are two basic resources that an operator
Hmm.
will require. One is the radio spectrum, okay, which
Okay.
most of us
Okay.
know from the 2G scam, at least in India. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah. So the
Yeah.
spectrum forms as the most critical resource. The second is the
Right.
network infrastructure. There are a host of equipment. The most visible one of all of them being the towers, right? If you next time when
Right.
you look at a tower, if you look at it carefully, you will see a lot of you know lot cuboid like structures put on it, right? Several cuboid like structures apart from the
Right.
dishes.
Right.
Just below the dishes there are
Yes.
several such equipments put in. So these
Right.
equipment, basically every mobile service generation has a certain architecture, a certain set of
Hmm.
components which is specific to that generation. So 4G will
Okay.
have a set of equipments which is specific to them. 5G will have equipments which is specific to them. So
Hmm.
basically these two resources, the network infrastructure and the spectrum, that the operator
Right.
uses these two resources in a temporal manner to sort of provision the
Okay.
services. Now there are heavy costs to doing that, right? From the
Okay.
operator perspective,
Right.
purchasing of spectrum is a very costly affair. Spectrum costs somewhere in the order of billions of US dollars, right? Everywhere
Right.
in the world, right?
Right.
And the
Right.
network infrastructure again is a very costly affair. So they have to
Right.
understand how to deploy them temporally, meaning in an incremental fashion, right? Whenever a new service
Right.
comes in, you can't
Hmm.
overnight just deploy this infrastructure, because it's a very time taking process,
Right.
right? And because
Right.
there are, in different areas, in different geographies, the demand is different, right? The purchasing power is
Right.
different. So obviously,
Right.
how you go about meeting those demand involves a lot of analysis and thinking
Hmm.
beforehand.
Hmm.
So I
Right.
largely look at that. So if you take an operator in India, my thesis wants to answer, okay, what are the different spectrum bands through which he can provision the resources? What
Okay.
spectrum bands will cost him more in
Mm-hmm.
combination with the infrastructure? What will cost him less? How
Hmm.
feasible it is to go with a particular spectrum band? Whether it is a good idea to look at a mix of bands rather than just one band? uh, is is
Right.
is 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 sharing of infrastructure amongst the operators rather than just competition, right? So whether collaborating in
Okay.
infrastructure
Yeah.
sharing, whether that leads to some improvement, so on and so forth. So basically, all these questions I try to analyze in my thesis. Right? This is the second part of my thesis. This
Okay.
is largely rooted in the Indian context, and so therefore it is very much relevant to policy. And
Right.
the third part in my thesis basically looks at whether the capital investments as exogenous variables, whether they sort of drive the
Right.
adoption of mobile services in India, whether they have been able to do it, which is a panel sort of an analysis that I have done. So largely these three questions or problems is what I want to. I mean, I have sort of attempted to answer in my
Okay.
thesis. Yeah, I'm sorry. It must have been
Okay.
a
Oh,
very
that's a
long
quite.
monologue, but and
No,
and,
no,
and
no.
I have
It's
to
not a
apologize to the
monologue.
audience if they read.
No, no. It's a very wonderful and lucid way of explaining us because they're all interlinked, right? It's a sort of flowing one question from the other, and
Well,
so
thank you. I would also want the audience to ask questions on this if they have, or
yes.
anything
If
else, because
anybody,
let's make it slightly more interactive,
yes, yes, yes.
rather than a full monologue coming from my side.
Right. So, does anybody have any questions at this point?
So I have not
Any
spoken about the
clarification?
methodology. I have only given a
Yes.
brief overview of the problem that I've analyzed, but I would be happy to
Right.
discuss methodology in detail if anybody wants to.
Yeah. So, or if anybody has any doubts on the concepts also,
Yeah, yeah.
if you want to know any further about any of these ideas, you can still ask. You can unmute yourself and ask the question directly, or you can even type in the box.
So let's go ahead. Meanwhile, if somebody has to ask,
Yes, 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 yes,
let them
yes.
raise a hand or something.
So feel free to raise your hand or unmute and ask us any questions. Uh, okay, so Ashu, then, so what were the actual concerns of these operators? So now there's 4G LTE infrastructure, right? That was your major point
Hmm.
of study.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what did you come up with, like, are some of the key concerns of these operators?
Yeah. So if you just look at the market in India, the telecom market in India,
Hmm.
there are certain
Right,
striking. I mean, I would say some striking contradictions that which is very specific to India, I would say.
okay.
First thing is uh, if you look at the metric of average revenue per user, right, which is
Right,
whatever revenue an individual can sort of offer to the operator, it is almost
right,
was on a decline, at least in the last 4 years, right? The revenue, so
right.
basically RPU translates into the revenue for operators. So that was simply going
Okay,
down for the operators, right? And a lot of consolidation
okay.
happened, which most of us are aware. uh, Several big mergers happened, right?
Yes,
So one thing was clear, that the operators are struggling to make profit. Now, generally, telecom has not been a very profitable endeavor across the world, but in India, the
right.
case was way more severe when compared to other countries, right? Which I think largely sort of
Okay.
sparked the consolidation that we see. So that is
Yes,
one striking concern. The second striking concern was, uh, 4G LTE is a relatively new technology, right?
right.
Which requires good amount of spectrum bandwidth. Now, for the users, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, for the participants, let me explain. Basically, spectrum is a continuum, right? It's part of an
Yes,
magnetic spectrum, so it's a continuum of radio frequencies, and
right.
you take a chunk of it for using in the communication systems, right? Now,
Yes,
how do you
yeah,
identify different areas of spectrum is by something called as a carrier frequency. Okay,
right.
so anywhere from around 500 megahertz to 3000 megahertz is what we are
Hmm.
using in India, and there are several carrier
Okay,
frequencies, meaning bandwidth around that carrier frequency is actually used. So if I have to make it
okay.
simpler, for example, the way your phone connects to the towers, right, that is through a particular
Right.
frequency. So your phone is
Yes.
designed to operate in certain frequencies only. Okay, so that is the reason you
Right.
may
Right.
not be able to operate a 4G phone in a 5 for a 5G service, all right, or a
Okay.
3G phone
Yeah.
for a 4G service, right? Similarly, on the
Yes.
other side, the tower side, that they are also designed to
Hmm.
sort of work on certain frequencies only. So these are called carrier
Right.
frequencies, right? Now,
Right.
the government, right? Our government,
Hmm.
the telecom wing of the government, which is the Department of Telecom, they
Right.
sell these spectrum in different carrier frequencies. Okay. Now, for India,
Okay.
what I could see that some of the carrier frequencies, which globally people say are very good for 4G, right? They were going on
Right.
unsold. They were not
Okay.
inviting any takers, right?
Okay.
So, and then
Right.
uh, this is as far back as 2015. We did a small paper where we could see that if a newcomer, if a new entrant is sort of provisioning that service over that particular carrier frequency, it is going to be a
Hmm.
profitable thing for him. And then
Okay.
we were just perplexed as to why then people are not buying that particular spectrum, right, if it is both technically
Right.
and financially lucrative. So
Right.
that is another striking thing in India, which was very specific to India.
Okay.
So that is the second contradiction which I could see. Then third contradiction is regarding the rural urban digital divide, right? uh,
Right.
at the time when we begin when I started my research, I could see that a lot of these new generation services, they are
Mm-hmm.
mostly concentrated around your rural areas, which is a no brainer because obviously the potential for profitability is much higher in these areas. And in the
Right.
urban areas there are less, probably the revenue collections may not be that great. So
Right.
what that was making the operators do was they
Right.
wanted to deploy all these services in urban areas only, and not venturing into the
Ah.
deployment in the rural areas, right? And the concern
Right.
was basically the profitability. So we wanted to explore whether this scenario can
Okay.
be changed through specific policy levers, and whether we could provide some analysis and some way of sort of doing, of make convincing the operators that deploying infrastructure in rural areas it can also be a profitable enterprise. So these three or four things were largely,
Oh.
what served as the main motivation, so to say, of my research, right? And we went about analyzing that. I would like to share an interesting
Right.
finding here. When we analyze the diffusion rate of
Okay.
these new services, right, across India, we
Mm-hmm.
found that
Right.
surprisingly in the rural areas the rate is much higher, right, and or at least comparable with the
Okay.
urban areas. So the problem is then not from the demand side as much as we would like to believe. Okay, now this is again simplifying a whole
Okay.
lot of things that I've done, but largely this is what it means. Okay,
Oh,
so then what is the issue?
okay.
Then what
Okay.
is the issue is that led me
Yeah.
to
Right.
probe even further. So did I answer your questions, or did I just went off on a different
Yeah.
different
No, no,
trajectory?
no.
I have this habit of going
No, no,
on.
no. That's exactly. No, 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 no. This is exactly like I asked you about the
Okay,
concerns that network operators are facing and what are the interesting things that you found.
okay,
Yes.
okay, all right.
All right. Okay. So then when you're talking about diffusion, so I wanted to ask you about this diffusion theory models that you said you've used. And
Hmm.
also you have used a similar model called as GOMPAS epidemic model to
Hmm.
understand the spread of COVID-19 epidemic in your recent paper, right?
Right, 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 right.
So what is this whole? So now that I understood from whatever you have talked that
Hmm.
there are certain models, methods
Hmm.
from
Hmm.
which you can capture the adoption and the diffusion of a particular
Hmm.
innovation. So you are trying to understand how much it is diffused,
Right,
right? So whether be it a technology or be it an epidemic. So
right.
can you tell us more about this diffusion? So how to capture? I understand that this is a method to capture diffusion. So what is it?
Right, right, right. So actually,
Right.
one problem which every
Hmm.
business faces when they want to launch any new
Right.
innovation, or a commercial, or they want to commercialize a particular product, they are always anxious as to how it will
Right.
do perform in a market, right? So they
Yes.
initial this thing is to go ahead and float surveys as to what kind of preferences people have, whether they would like to go for a certain product, so on and so forth,
Right.
right? So that is
Right.
sort of a prospectively estimating how their product will perform, right? uh,
Right. Right.
there was this scientist called Everett Rogers. He was agricultural sociologist, all right. That is way
Okay.
back in
Okay.
1960s. Now what he did, he was looking
Right.
at different agricultural equipments and agricultural processes, how launched by the government, the US government, how that performs amongst the agriculturists at that time, right? So he did a very wide
Right.
survey
Right.
of different processes, different agricultural innovations, so on and so forth. Now, after doing all
Right.
of that, what he realized was that no matter
Hmm.
what innovation you take, there is a
Right.
commonality in the way it sort of performs in the market in a given period of time, right? So if you look at a
Right.
10-year kind of a duration and analyze how a particular product or service has done over those 10 years, right, in absolute numbers. For example,
Right.
if there are 100 people in the market and you have say
Hmm.
an year's time, so the way people will
Right.
adopt, right, those services is strikingly similar
Right.
for different
Right.
processes, for different products and processes, I mean. So then
Right.
he was able to provide a theory of how these new products or services sort of perform in the market, and he called it the diffusion, right? The diffusion of
Okay.
innovations, right? And he divided
Right.
this
Right.
this famous bell curve of diffusion into like 5 areas, right? Where he's trying to
Okay.
talk about who are the people who go and buy that product for the first time. These
Mhm.
people are high on
Okay.
innovation, and they want to try different product. Then there are some people who wait for the others to sort of start using that, and then they imitate others, and then go ahead and sort of buy that product, so on and so forth. So there's a whole lot of categories that he talks about. Now from
Right.
there on several mathematical models appeared. So what happens, for example,
Right.
if you have the data of say an innovation which has been in the market for say 10 months, right? And I know
Right.
what is the
Right.
daily sales or monthly sales, right? So these mathematical models
Right.
then sort of use that historical data and predict the
Right.
curve for that particular product, the curve that
Okay.
Rogers talked about, right? So there are
Right.
several
Right.
such models now. The most famous model, which was used by management theorists, is called the Bass model. Many of us would have heard that, the Bass diffusion model, right?
Right.
So
Right.
he it was a set of differential equations which he solved, and which he applied to the data at hand. And to his surprise, he was able to predict the future sales of products to a reasonable accuracy, right? And since then there have
Okay.
been several versions of that model, and several alternate models which have been applied. Interestingly, now more than 100 years ago, people had proposed certain mathematical models to understand how a disease will spread in a given geographical region, right? Because the population in that
Right.
region is constant, so
Right.
uh, they wanted to understand how a disease will progress, right? The famous epidemic
Okay.
models
Right.
that we hear now. So the current
Yes.
models are quite complex and more evolved, but the fundamental models which was given 100 years ago were applied in the management context. So many people picked these models and they applied whether those models are able to predict the sales of a particular product, and it was possible to predict those sales by those models. So then a host of different
Right.
models get applied to predict the future sales at this point of time.
Right.
Now
Right.
surprisingly, no one model is the most superior. So it's a comparative
Right.
approach of applying various models and then coming at your
Oh.
forecasts, right, by
Oh.
estimating what is the error in the forecast, so on and so forth. So
Right.
this is how the history of diffusion models came into being is.
Wow. Okay. 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 Great. Okay. At this point, does anybody have any questions? You
Okay,
can
I can
unmute
see
your.
one question from Kirti. Can the same
Okay.
models be used to measure diffusion of technology as the spread of a disease? Why and how? Yeah, so the answer is yes. So
Hmm.
basically, the epidemic models, their fundamental, proposition was that any system, if you take a particular country which has a finite population or some rate of growth of population. Now, the fundamental proposition was that an epidemic will sort of grow, and because of the limits to the system, it will start saturating. Once it approaches a particular population, it will start to saturate, right? So that will give rise to what is now known as the famous S-shaped curve, right? Because the population has limits, it will start saturating. And the diffusion models, which were applied in products and processes, they also share that remarkably similar S-shaped curve. Okay, so then it was only a matter of applying the epidemic models to predict the uptake of, say, the different products and processes. Now, how the second part of his question is why and how. I think I've answered the why. How is basically what you do is you need to have a certain set of data points. At least 27 data points are required, which can be the sales of that product, daily sales, quarterly sales, yearly sales, whatever. But minimum 27 data points are required. Using those data points and those functions corresponding to different models, you fit the curve, right? Using a non-linear least squares estimation approach. And using now every model has certain parameters whose values you're supposed to estimate by doing that analysis. Once you have those parameters estimated from the data, then you can make empirical forecasts pertaining to whatever case it is that you're applying. So if it is an epidemic and I have the time series data of infections, daily infections over a period of time, I can use the models to predict how the infections will grow over time. The same if I have the time series data of sales of a particular innovation, I can predict the future uptake of that innovation. So I hope that answers that question. Okay, okay, he has a follow up.
Yes, it
Can I
answers the
then?
question.
Yeah, Kirti, go ahead.
It answers the question.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, definitely you can use the models to study how viral a meme will be. If you can extract the data of how many times it is being viewed by people in a given period of time. Definitely the movie case also can be similarly applied.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, great. Okay, so then now just moving ahead with your COVID paper, the paper on the COVID-19 diffusion.
Mm-hmm.
So how close are your results to the actual reality, and what was interesting, and how did you think that first of all, I mean, I understand now clearly you've explained that why this model could have been applied to the COVID-19 analysis.
Right.
But what were some limitations or precautions that you need to take when you were applying this model? And that's one part. And the other part is then what are your interesting observations, not just in terms of the diffusion model and the results that you got, but in general about understanding the COVID situation and any interesting thoughts that you gather in this process.
Right. So I think I would again want to begin from what motivated me to undertake this COVID related work. So basically it was somewhere around the end of March, where by that time we had at least a good enough data point for me to do the analysis, and I was looking at the state of affairs in different countries, and then I was looking at these projections which were made for India, which were which seemed to me were very high, so to speak. And so I thought, okay, can I apply my models here? The answer to that was a yes. But then can I predict in a better way, because the models which people had applied and predicted were more sophisticated, right? So so to give you an idea, basically you have two broad sets of models. One is called as compartmental models, and the other is these epidemiological models. Now so one kind of models basically works on the real data. The other kinds of model, they have certain functional forms which they want to sort of without data they are making certain projections based on some heuristics. Okay, so many of these compartmental models, the SIR models, which are famously known, the susceptible, infected, and recovered models, so they are compartmental models, right? So they work on a parameter called as your reproduction rate, R naught factor, right? Whereby the assumption is that a particular disease, if there is a particular epidemic, it has a certain R naught, meaning how many people can one people affect in the system, and so on and so forth. So they primarily use this R naught to predict the uptake, and the upper limit is of course the population of the country. but these are not grounded in real empirical data, you understand, of how actually the disease has progressed. So so now the one of the models which I had applied in my thesis is called the Gomper's model. Gomper's model is more than 100 years old. It's one of the most fundamental models. And if you take the SIR model and only look at the infected, the equation for the infected people, the Gomper's model and that equation is almost the same. Okay, so it reduces to Gomper's model. So then I thought that let me apply the most fundamental model to see, so to predict, how COVID will perform in India. Okay, COVID cases will rise in India. So that's how I took up. But then now the challenge was, look, till March 24th, there was no lockdown in the country. Although we had good number of cases, there was no lockdown. Now from March 25th, lockdown was about to begin, right? So of course, what would have been the initial projection before March 25th will now change because of a lockdown in place, right? But how do you know how much of an impact will the lockdown make, right? So there was, at least through data, there was no way we could have actually guessed that. So I looked at other countries and I saw that for China, if you look at the curve for China, the total number of COVID cases curve, you will see that there is a saturation which is almost which in China the COVID cases are approaching saturation. The S-shaped curve is almost complete, right? And remarkably, the majority of the data that is there, that is the post-lockdown data. All right. So whatever data you see of China, that corresponds to the post-lockdown period. So that means, now if I use the fundamental assumption that epidemics in different countries follow a more or less similar diffusion pattern. Now by similar, I don't mean that the rate of diffusion will be the same, but the nature of spread is most likely going to be this famous S-shaped curve. Now, so that the idea came that whether I can use Chinese data as a case of in lockdown scenario data, right? And estimate the parameters and use it, combine it with, the prior data of India prior to lockdown, and then make the forecast. So so there's a whole lot of details involved. If somebody is interested, they can access my paper. So I did that.
Sure.
But then I didn't want to sort of talk about it too much, because first of all, it was a work in progress based on very few data, and I could have been wrong, right? Then there were several limitations. There is the testing criteria. People were saying that we are testing less, right? And there is a whole lot of variation in India in terms of how it is spreading in cities and in other parts of the country. The impact of people coming in from outside, meaning the expatriates and so on and so forth. So at that time I didn't talk too much about it, but after 2 months, when I looked at the projections, I could see that it remarkably sort of matches with my predictions. I would actually want to show you on the screen one graph. I don't know whether people are on their desktops, but so this is from that working paper, which I wrote it as a full paper, and it is under review right now.
Okay.
So I analyzed some 3 different scenarios of lockdown. Okay, because lockdowns across different countries can be either strictly enforced or moderately enforced, or loosely enforced, meaning it's up to the people whether they want to follow it or not, right? So because in India we could have gone either way, so I sort of analyzed all 3 approaches. Okay, and can you see my screen?
It started. Yes, now I can.
Yeah. Okay, so let me take you to. So this is the model that I have applied. These are the 2 functional representations of the model, and so this was the figure that you see is the figure prior to the lockdown for India, total number of cases. Okay, and then we estimate the parameters, and then if you take the original projections, meaning if there is no lockdown and you use the data available before March 25th, then this is what you will get. Okay, there is no sign of saturation anywhere. Okay, and we could have seen more than 14 million cases of COVID in India by the end of June 30.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Now, what happens when I go for that? When I incorporate the lockdown scenarios, so there is a set of heuristics which I've used. I've used the Chinese data, and I've used some of it to train my model and then forecast. So this is my model for China. Okay, the dotted line that you see, the dotted line is the forecast from the training data, meaning the data prior to that. Okay, so you can see my forecasts are sort of slightly more than what the Chinese authorities have reported. Now, all of this is based on the assumption that the data reported by the authorities is accurate, right? Which may or may not be the case for China. All right. Now, here is the India's projections. Okay. Now, the topmost S-shaped curve that you see, right? That is for a very weakly implemented lockdown. The second one is for moderately implemented lockdown, and the third one is for a very strictly implemented lockdown. Okay, so as you can see, for a very strictly implemented lockdown, we were hitting a figure of around more than 1 lakh by the end of June, right?
Yes.
And as well, we were, I mean, it was expected that the number of cases will saturate if the lockdowns are implemented properly. Okay, but now what happened actually? Okay, I'll come to this curve later, but let me. So this is sort of a validation. Okay, now what you see here, the third curve, right? The dotted curve is the actual number of cases reported in India post March, and the blue line, this is the forecast which was made for a strict lockdown enforcement. So what you can see that for a long period, at least for the first 4 weeks, we were able to manage. We were able to keep our total number of cases to a reasonable limit, right? But then there is the slope suddenly increases after the third week of April. Okay, and you see it is just going on a different trajectory by the end of May. Okay. So while the actual cases were between my strict enforcement and moderate enforcement, the same cannot be said to be to apply at this point in time, right? Because it appears that they are going to go veer off, right, in the future. So then very recently I took the data till the end of May and did my projections without taking any heuristics, and this is what you see. I wish I could have brought good news, but this is what you could see. Okay. The epidemic life cycle for India, at least based on my projections, it seems that would continue to grow and would grow by leaps and bounds at least till the third quarter of this year. Okay. And somewhere around the fourth quarter, we would see the number of cases coming down and saturation sort of setting in. Okay. But at least for the next 3 to 4 months, it's going to be a challenging time for our country. So based on these projections, and I hope generally researchers don't say that, but I really hope that I'm totally wrong. And
you are wrong.
The cases are way lesser than what seems. But this is what is coming from the analysis as of now, right? And I have used conservative forecast. All right. So yeah. So that is about the analysis. We can. I'll just stop sharing and we can move ahead now.
Sure. So, does anybody else have any questions at this point?
How many people are left?
You can unmute.
Okay, it's Kirti, Saurabh, Shavik, and Ajit. Okay, all right.
Yes. So, does any of you have any questions? You can unmute your microphone or you can chat. All right. Okay, Ashu, then if there are no questions, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, okay, if there are no questions, then I have like one question to end the discussion. So, all right. So now we've begun talking about information systems, and then now we've moved on to, how you can use all these kinds of analysis especially technology diffusion analysis and theoretic models to understand any kind of diffusion. We talked about COVID, how that is diffused. So now in this entire process, so how does this information systems and social, now that we are talking about COVID and especially during this lockdown, how do you see that this information systems are like social media outlets and this entire data being generated? Are there any interesting aspects that one should take note of to look at in academic point of view or otherwise? So any interesting observations that you've had?
Yeah, that's a great question,
Okay.
actually. So there are a few things which I observed and which are remarkable, I feel. Uh,
Okay.
you know, in the context of the COVID-19 situation. First of all, the fact that data is very important, is,
Right.
I think, is realized, and data collection is taken up very seriously by authorities. Now we may question
Right.
the accuracy of those of the data being reported, but we cannot deny the fact that that this measuring any phenomena is, especially something which can be as dangerous as COVID, is really given serious thought. So across the world, there was a good uh, amount of data which was being collected, and now since we have these options of collaborating across different countries, because of the advancements in the way we share data, a lot of people
Right.
started working together and collaborated to sort of understand and analyze the situation and probably give their insights and policy prescriptions and so on and so forth. So one thing that is remarkable is the use of GitHub, which I think I
Right.
would actually recommend to even uh, other PhD students who are working on secondary data, especially, or somebody
Right.
who's an enthusiast and wants to understand how that works. So version control is an important aspect that people should be aware, at least people working with the secondary data. And GitHub is that
Right.
tool which is very popular across different countries. Let me give you an example. There have been cases where in China and in North Korea, people have shared very sensitive information which they could otherwise not have shared, using GitHub in the
Right.
form of codes and scripts, and that data
Right.
became available to people across the globe. Uh,
Hmm.
so all of this largely it comes under the open source software, this thing. So I think that is one skill people should understand. I mean, should learn. And if you are working
Right.
in version control, you also need to know a little bit of coding in things such as R or Python, right? People in working with secondary data can also at least choose one of them and start developing their skill set. It is very
Right.
useful because I have found that many of the questions, right, many of the scenarios which we are trying to analyze on our own, sometimes
Right.
when we communicate and share with others and
Right.
collaborate with others, the results and the analysis improves by a considerable margin, right? So in
Right.
that
Right.
sense, of course, the problem formulation and all the other steps of the research you will undertake yourself, but
Right.
in that small intermediate part, when you seek help, the findings can be
Right.
really sort of improved, and in that sense the research doesn't have to be a one man's journey, right? so
Sure.
so I think that is
Right.
one aspect which is coming out very uh, you know intensely in this COVID situation. I'll give you
Right.
examples. There is this website called as Our World in Data. Now
Right.
it collates empirical data from across the countries, and it has put everything for free. And there are a lot of open source developers which are working day in day night to sort of analyze the data and put it to good use for everybody's information. In India, we have
Right.
this COVID-19india.org, which was started by a
Right.
set of developers. I'm a part of that. It's on Telegram. Uh,
Oh,
what we
great.
do is basically, again, we crowdsource data from different parts of the country. Now there may be differences in the data on a particular point in time, but overall the data sort of is exactly the same as that reported by the government. But
Okay.
one important aspect of that is we are also crowdsourcing patients related data, right, which is otherwise very difficult to
Okay.
collect by authorities because they are not trained for
Right.
it. So
Yeah.
all interested folks, they are trying to collate these information from their local newspapers, from wherever they are in different parts of the country, and there's a huge database of patients that you can find, right, their age groups, their
Right.
history of travel, the kinds of comorbidities they have, so on and so forth, which can be extremely useful for
Right.
analysis, right? So again, this is
Right.
done, all the people who are involved in this, they're working without any remuneration or anything. It's purely a love for the analysis and the that enthusiasm and this goodwill of making a difference here in this particular situation. So
Right.
I think
Right. Right.
for researchers working with secondary data, I think this can be an important area to look at. uh,
Right.
this also helps in collaboration with different researchers when you sort of after you complete your thesis. I am on some of these collaboration groups. So again,
Right.
it is helpful in your own research as well, not just to sort of
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
right. So that's largely the
Right.
point I wanted to make, right?
Sure.
uh,
Thanks.
is there anything I missed, or
Ashu,
you
there
wanted
are
me to answer specifically?
no. That's quite exhaustive. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It answers my question. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
And Ashu, we have two questions
Yeah.
here. Shavik Bhattacharya is asking, can you
Hmm.
please briefly explain the two exponential equations that has been used? And there's another question from Ajit Babu. Does the population taken for the model, is it total population of India or based on the red zones or containment zones?
Okay,
So you
okay.
can choose
So
to
I'll begin with the
take an
first
order.
question. Yeah,
Okay.
somebody was trying to come in. Okay. So okay, so let me just share that screen once more and show solve that equation. Yeah. So the first equation is basically the probability density function, and the second one is the cumulative density function. So they are basically the one and the same equation, just the functional forms are different. What happens is, if you look at equation number 2, right, the n of t is the total number of entities. It can be people, products, processes, so on and so forth, at a given point in time. K is the asymptote. Then you have exponential to the power minus exponential to the power minus b1. Now b1 and b2, these two are the two parameters of the model. So in all, we have three parameters to estimate: k, b1, and b2, right? B1 is the rate of diffusion, and b2 is an offset in the time scale. Now you can go ahead and look it up. If you want to understand it in detail, just look for Gomper's model function, and Wiki has a very good page on it. But to summarize, basically what we come to know when we fit the data to this particular equation is that what is the rate of diffusion of that particular phenomena that you're trying to analyze. What is the asymptote, right? I mean, from that, what information you get is, okay, when will the saturation happen? How long will it take for the saturation to happen, right? So these are the information that you derive from estimating these parameters. All right. We can take it offline if you want to understand more about it. And the second question was, again, let me just reiterate.
Yeah. Is the population taken for the model total population of India or based on the red zones or containment zones?
Yeah, no, so we have not done I have not done a zonal analysis in that paper. This paper currently restricts itself to understanding, the countrywide, scenario. I am doing zonal analysis separately, wherein I am analyzing the data across different states, and I'm trying to do an assessment of health infrastructure readiness of different states. So probably that I can share with you at a later point of time. So I am only taking the population at the country level.
Okay, great. All right. So there are like a couple of minutes if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, we
Yeah, I
can.
mean, I'm pretty open to taking questions relating to your own research. Probably, if you're experiencing if you want more clarity or you want more information regarding your analysis or methodology or anything else that you feel I can help you, I'm pretty much open to that. I think that's also. I would also like to hear from you. As to what kind of analysis of you are doing and whether I can sort of come in there.
Right. So, anybody, feel free. Uh, does anybody like to discuss about their own methodological issues, or if you have any kind of questions with regard to your own work as well, you may kind of discuss. Yeah. All right. So I don't think
Yeah, that's okay.
as of now there's only. Yeah, but please do if in case you need any kind of help or any kind of discussion, if you need, please feel free to approach Ashutosh, and I'm sure he would be willing to help. And he has been helping most of us, and I'm sure he would extend his help to most of you as well. Right. Uh, okay, Ashutosh, thank you very, very much for joining. And this has been like one great, a very elaborate explanation of a lot of concepts, models, and you've given us kind of a very good picture of how things work out in the thesis. Though you did not want to join MIS, you have ended up in MIS, and I think you've done a brilliant job. Your academic publications, your best conference awards, and more than that, the way you have explained shows how much you enjoyed this process and how much you've learned. And through this, I think we have also learned a lot. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I wish you all the very best. And I hope in times to come you'll have uh,
Mm.
even better and more intense participation and discussions. And I think
Yes, I think it's
that'll be
probably
very
to do
good
with
for
the
the.
time also.
Yeah,
Right,
that's something that we
right,
need, and it's going to be extremely useful for the FP community, because I think we need to
right.
sort of interact more than what we are doing currently amongst ourselves,
Absolutely.
right?
Totally.
So all right, thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you everybody, and have a
Thank you
great
very much.
night.
Thank you everybody for joining. And tomorrow we have a talk on the Discord app, the Radio Sofia, with Christopher Murphy, talking about what is ongoing in America right now, about racism and about the sexuality and many more other topics. So feel free to check out the Radio Sofia Facebook page, and also you can join for the talks on Discord. Good night, everybody. Yeah. Thank you, Ashu.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
So you can stop the recording and yeah.
Yeah.